Hi there, I'm Faith Reynolds from Devon Consulting, where I have been looking at how we can better design digital payments to reflect people's needs. And I'm also the author of a report called Hidden Heroes, which has kindly been funded by Link. And that report has been exploring the experiences of the 11 million people who help others manage their money. And amongst other things, apart from that, I've also been advising the Connection Project, which is a cross-sector initiative looking at how we can create a digital society within which everyone can thrive. And I'm joined today by Jemma.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. So my name's Jemma Waters and I'm a director at the Connection Project. And as Faith said, we're a cross-sector organisation looking to understand how do we help people not just participate in a digital society, but truly thrive. In the last kind of 7-8 months since the Connection Project's been set up, we've been doing lots of things, everything from looking at needs-based segmentations, looking at what other countries have been doing that we can learn from and understand how might we be a more effective digital nation. And we're now turning all of that insight into a set of plans and recommendations later this year, which is very exciting.
And it has been really exciting, I have to say, sort of watching from the sidelines, watch it all come to life. And I particularly enjoyed the launch of the report this last week at the House of Lords. It was all very busy.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a lot of hard work. So yeah, bringing all of that together, all of that international case studies, lots of information from community partners, from large corporates who have all been tackling this space separately. And I think the real magic of the Connection Project is recognizing that actually we all have shared customers, we all have shared citizens who are trying to navigate all of these different changes separately. And our ethos is how do we think a bit differently and bring that together? So stay tuned, but definitely please do read our report because there's lots in it.
Yeah, we'll make sure there's a link for that in the chat as well. I guess one of the things I find quite fascinating about the report is that we're all, to a more or lesser degree, we're all part of digital transition, but we're all sort of to a lesser degree or a higher degree kind of digitally included. And I tend to think of myself as quite tech savvy, but I think if you were to ask my children that question, they might query my degree of savviness. They might not quite think I'm as savvy as they are. And I suppose that's one of the things that it's not quite so straightforward as there's a group of older people who can't engage with digital. It's actually much broader than there's a much bigger spectrum.
Absolutely, yeah. And prior to the Connection Project, I worked at Lloyds Banking Group and set up a lot of the digital and financial inclusion initiatives there, including things like the Lloyds Consumer Digital Index, which has benchmarked digital capability across time since 2015. And exactly to that point, Faith, the challenge is that the goalposts are always moving. What we just, what is digital enough? How digital is the UK? It feels like, there's a consistent picture, but actually when you double click into it, there's so much complexity there. And I think that's why what's been brilliant about the Connection Project and kind of zooming out a little bit and looking at it from a fresh perspective is the fact that actually, whilst there's lots of information out there about digital demographics and digital behaviours and digital attitudes, including things like the Consumer Digital Index, what we haven't had before, which we now do through the Connection Project, is have that view of what are the needs? What are the needs that citizens have that aren't yet being met? And recognising that actually, digital enablement is a state, not a trait. You can absolutely, in one situation, be brilliant at doing things digitally and really confident. So there'll be loads of stuff, Faith, that you just absolutely crack on with. But then there'll be the odd thing where, yeah, you probably do have to say to your kids, what is this? What am I doing? How do I get through it? And it's recognising that actually for essential services, particularly when there's app refreshes, there's things changing all the time, there's standards evolving, it's really hard to navigate, really hard to navigate. And I think that's why looking at the Consumer Digital Index and then having the double click into the hidden heroes is just so valuable because there are so many people who, under the radar are helping people every day navigate all of those different changes and navigating their finances in an ever more digital world.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, isn't it? I think that's what makes sort of there's sort of quite a lot of power in the Connection Project in terms of bringing these different organisations together and thinking about how do we begin describing different segments in a way that works cross-sector, so we can all sort of describe the experiences people have in a similar way, so that we can help them in a cross-sector way, because actually people aren't just dealing with one bit of digital here and another bit of digital there. Actually, our lives are they're all grouped together, aren't they? I'm ringing about my utilities, I'm trying to sort it out online, I'm trying to do my payments online. All those things kind of come together, and so so I suppose it's really powerful to see that segmentation come to life, and we'll also make sure that's in the links for people to download. I suppose, but just thinking about the Lloyds Consumer Digital Index, and when we look at financial services specifically, I think that interaction between digital inclusion and financial inclusion is really sort of getting more and more noticeable now, and that's certainly what I found when we were looking at the report in the Hidden Heroes. We sort of found that where some people were very clear about what they wanted to do with their money, they weren't necessarily confident enough to do that digitally. But it's not new news. So I remember one of the series of one of the episodes of the Digital Index showing a graph that was really helpful, actually, showing that how financial capability and confidence rises with age, but actually how digital capability tends to decrease with age, or at least do a little bit of a curve. And I guess there's that crossover around middle age, where people are both feeling digitally confident and financially capable, and that's probably where I am at the moment. I'm probably not as digitally capable as my children, but I'm feeling more financially capable. And I guess it just sort of highlights that real mix of skills that people need now to be financially included.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, to be honest, it's a trend that we've seen consistently. I think the first time that graph was produced was all the way back in 2015. But I think what's fascinating is then looking at how different situations, different economic climates, different technologies are then impacting how that X kind of moves and where that point becomes. But you're absolutely right. It's that almost kind of sandwich generation in the middle who are trying to make sure that their parents are able to do what they need to do digitally. They're trying to help their kids navigate what is a really complex world, but also, given the pace of change, thinking about TikTok influencers, for example, how do they make sure that they're really clear as well on what's safe, what's the right kind of advice and guidance, where is this kind of working in the right way? So I think age has just been such an interesting part of the analysis, but always triggered and changed by circumstance, life event, and also essential services. How good are those digital tools? How easy are they to navigate? How clear is it that they're really safe? And I think that's where at the Connection Project, we think there's a real opportunity to improve that and make it a little bit simpler for citizens, so that the onus isn't all on the individual to try and understand, what's right. And what can they trust?
And I think it's really important, isn't it? Because there's like a lot of. So what I found, if we think about that Lloyds Consumer Digital Index, I think in 2024 you found there were 11 million people helping others, and I found that really quite sort of surprising, because that is, if you say every one of those people is helping another, that's 22 million people. Nearly a third of the population are actually kind of engaged in this helping and being helped. And sort of trying to sort of create confidence and trust in the system, because it's not quite happening in and of itself. And and I suppose that's what led to the Hidden Heroes report, which explores the experiences of 849 financial helpers. And it is clear actually that people are struggling with even sort of quite basic financial tasks like checking a balance, and that, in fact, that was the task that is most often cited, and I think it was the same in your survey. Is that actually people are struggling with the very basic thing of just how much money have I got. And when we talked to the helpers about how much time they were spending in helping, it was quite regular and it was quite consistent, and for around a third it was more than kind of like 5 hours a month, I think, and in some cases people had been helping for 10 plus years. This is ongoing regular support over really quite long time periods. And so we did a little estimate, and based on kind of very conservative estimates using the national living wage, we found that these 11 million helpers are providing around the equivalent of 4 billion a year to facilitate digital financial inclusion in the UK, and they're kind of like a social safety net for the banking ecosystem, because we haven't quite managed to make it work as we might have wanted to.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And also, particularly when you think how many of them are of a working age too, you know, on top of busy jobs, busy lives, then, you know, helping to that degree and kind of that extent. I think it's really fascinating, though. One of the things that when we kind of double clicked into the data on that 11 million, one of the things that I found really interesting is just the fact that I suppose there's often a bit of a myth in digital inclusion that it is all about the elderly. Actually, it's the elderly that need that additional kind of help and support all the time. And a bit to your point about the X, yes, they might need a bit more digital support. But actually what the Consumer Digital Index found is that consistently, actually across all age groups, is where people are helping. Actually, roughly 1 in 5 20 to 29-year-olds, roughly 1 in 5 30 to 39-year-olds, roughly 1 in 5 50 to 59-year-olds. The only slight change was then coming for 70 plus, where actually there's still 13% of people age 70 who are helping other people with their finances and helping them digitally. So it just goes to show that this isn't always a kind of sandwich generation or a kind of younger people helping older people. Exactly to your point, you know, it's as and when life events are coming up, it's the, you know, who do you lean on? Who do you kind of help and support? But I think, yeah, fascinating to think of 70 plus kind of helping each other to navigate all of these new tools. It's really exciting and really interesting. And it does make me think about, you know, some of our customers and people that we've helped through some of the help and support we've provided in the past. Because even last year, you know, the 2025 Consumer Digital Index really focused on AI and what impact is that having. And whilst we can see almost kind of 6 in 10 people are now asking AI questions related to their finances, I think it's really interesting to think about you know, how do you make sure that you don't assume that because they're doing that, they're incredibly digitally savvy and incredibly financially savvy, and gosh, aren't they really clever for using AI? It reflects on actually how do we make sure that that landscape is kind of answering the right questions, and also how do we make sure that, you know, consumers, citizens know the right questions to ask? Because I think what the rest of our Consumer Digital Index survey and essential digital skills work has shown is that actually, you know, sometimes it's knowing the right question to ask of the right person in the right place that's actually feels like the biggest barrier. And again, that's why people are leaning on the hidden helpers, the hidden heroes, because it's obviously trusted faces in local places who they know that they can ask questions of and get the best intentions, and you know there's a level of trust there.
Yeah, definitely. And people do put a lot of trust in others. You know, they are really leaning on them and trusting them with their financial information. It's really interesting that point you just made about AI, because I was just thinking about how I think I've read somewhere else about how people are using AI for sort of like therapy and emotional kind of support and engaging with AI in that way as well. And I think the thing that struck me about this the Hidden Heroes report was actually not just the statistics, but also the stories that people were telling about the help they were giving, why they were helping. And it's quite clear that emotions do often run high when it comes to money. I think it's natural for some people, you know, for all of us, I think, to have money worries, even when they're not justified in terms of have I got enough of it. But actually, I think it's really hard to manage those worries and just wanting to keep on top of things when you're having to ask other people to step in, or to ask other people because you can't quite work something out. And that was definitely some of the sense we got from the report, of people sort of saying, I started helping this person when they got so frustrated they just threw their phone across the room because they couldn't log on, or and other people sort of explaining how they were really sort of spending time patiently breaking things down for others, that they were taking time to do that, putting it into bite-sized chunks, making it easy, and sort of trying to balance that kind of giving people sort of independence and not trying to be patronising, trying to manage that line carefully. And some people really welcome. You know, people embrace that role. Some helpers really want to help. They feel good about helping and they enjoy that. And it's an opportunity, I think, for younger people sometimes to give back to older parents. But I do think for others, sometimes there's a bit of frustration as well in there. You know, it's like sometimes, you know, they get frustrated, they get overwhelmed, they flap, they close their ears, they can't listen, and that's really hard. You know, so you've got these sort of different experiences of financial helpers, if you like, and I think that it's just really sort of struck me, I suppose, that some of the reasons, while some people might have always needed help, perhaps because they're managing a disability, for others there were kind of two kind of key external factors, and I think one was when a bank branch closes, that was a kind of trigger for help, as people were sort of like lost to know quite what to do with an app. And the other was just the threat or the experience of fraud and scams, which could be really, really undermining.
Yeah, I think whenever there's a catalyst for change, as a person, how ready are you for that? And even work that we've done with small businesses in the past, where there's big life events or thing kind of happens to you. It's the same with, you know, we've seen through our research change, you're living your busy life, you've got lots of other things going on. And then when something external factors that kind of impact you, it's at that point, absolutely, you would be worried, nervous. There's lots of new things to navigate. But I think what's been really encouraging and really interesting is looking at where there are the right kind of interventions at the right time, where there is the right level of simple interface, the right level of simple service. Actually, it's just wonderful to see people's confidence bloom and to realise that actually, you know, when we think about skills, when we talk about skills, a lot of people think about, I think when any change happens, it's naturally really difficult for people because you're established, you've got habits, you know how things work, and then all of a sudden you've got to deal with something completely different, whether that is a change in your environment, a life event, you know, change in people that are kind of helping you. But I think what's been really brilliant to see through some of the work we've done out in communities and kind of out, you know, working with customers directly as well, is seeing that actually, whilst those catalysts can sometimes be really difficult, what's brilliant is then seeing hidden helpers, those trusted faces in local places, really spending the time and the effort with people, and then seeing them regain their sense of independence and their sense of autonomy is just wonderful. I think a lot of people, you know, learning is associated with school, and for a lot of people school was quite a negative experience, and actually to realise that there's no wrong answer, there's no time frame, there's no exam, and actually, you know, to have that kind of help and support and then feel really good about the fact that you can do new things and, you know, that you can keep up with what felt really daunting and really scaring is brilliant. I think the question just comes down to, you know, how do we help those helpers do those things more effectively? So it isn't 11 million people, you know, reinventing the wheel and having to create new resources and new things.
Yeah. It was in the survey we asked some of the helpers some of the improvements that they'd like to see, and they were, and it's clear that, you know, people are helping, actually the people they're helping are learning, and, you know, and kind of, I think one particular story is where somebody had been shown how to upload a check, and it was just like it kind of, just because it's a vox pop and she told the story, it's just sort of like it had blown the person's mind that actually this is, I can take a photo and it uploads, and where does it go? Well, it's just like a miracle. So yeah, so after a few times of doing that, he'd learned how to do it and was able to do it on his own, and that's really encouraging because it's like he's kind of maintaining his independence for longer. And so we asked people kind of about improvements. Sorry, going back to the improvements, and what you know, people made a real range of things, and some of the things they did say were things like, can we have some paper-based instructions that someone can take home so they can learn to use a banking app? And I have to say, given that sort of fintech came along and was all about intuitive design, I do wonder if there's some simplicity that might now be needed.
Absolutely. And I mean, I know it's a bit of a cliche, but that's why inclusive design just has to be baked into everything, because unless you understand where people are, what they need, what their barriers are, and design accordingly, there's always going to be people for whom, you know, these processes, these new services, all of these whizzy things just feel incredibly difficult. And I think that's part of why, you know, at the Connection Project, we're really trying to look at when it comes to creating, that really positive digital transition, it can't always be just the onus on the individual to having to, learn lots of new stuff, to build their own confidence. And it needs to also be all of the organisations and systems working together to think about, how do we simplify and how do we hold a mirror up to ourselves and make sure that we are creating really intuitive experiences. And I know a lot of organisations are investing a lot of time and effort in it, and working with lived experts to make sure that they're testing things as they go. And I mean, you can just see the results. So much easier for people to get involved, and also if they know that people like them have been part of the process of designing it and making it happen, it's less daunting as well.
Yeah, it's confidence is just really, really key, isn't it? It's about finding ways to give people sort of like confidence and help them to keep their independence for as long as possible. And I think that's one of the things that comes through quite clearly in the sort of the Hidden Heroes report, and some of the improvements that people were asking for. Is this sort of trusted third party access, where somebody can get some help from somebody they trust, a neighbour or friend or trusted family member, where they don't actually have to give up all control, and that person can't make payments on their behalf, but they can sort of see into the account, if you like, and be able to help that person maybe set controls around things like contactless. It's really interesting because there's work by Project Nemo, which looks, which kind of found sort of a similar thing with people with young people with learning difficulties, that actually they want to maintain their independence for as long as possible. Absolutely, that's what you'd expect, but they just need a bit of sort of support. And then Money and Mental Health Policy Institute also found that people may just need help for a short time while they are unwell, or having particular difficulties, but they don't need to seek control all the time. And at the moment, there just aren't the right tools quite there to support people. It's kind of power of attorney, or possibly something, but maybe not quite something in a lot of cases. And we found that because there aren't those tools there, 54% of people who were helping others were doing so without any formal authority. And that's replicated again in this other research I mentioned. So 87% of people with learning difficulties were using informal workarounds in the research by Project Nemo, and 65% of people with lived experience respondents in the Money and Mental Health Policy Institutes were also said that they'd allowed someone to access their kind of personal sensitive bank information. So I think, when we're looking to reduce fraud and scams, we're looking to keep the system as secure as possible. We need to design ways for us to kind of have trusted third parties who can help us, but to whom we don't have to cede or control. So I think it's just a really interesting area for innovation, an interesting area for the industry to have a look at.
Definitely. I think such a key point there is that point around it can be a state, not a trait. So actually someone might just need that support for a fixed amount of time, or for a fixed amount of services, going through a bereavement, a big challenging life event. I think, how do we think more about, again, inclusive design, citizens, the big life events that are impacting them, and what help and systems might they need at the time? Because, the ability to have help at the time and place that you need it, I think, it is just such a huge opportunity, and particularly thinking about it not just within financial services, but across other sectors too. So, with the Connection Project joining together and thinking about lots of different sectors, is there an opportunity for simpler TV interfaces? Is there an opportunity to think about simpler journeys when you're changing your broadband and you're thinking about connectivity? There's all of these little points that kind of ladder up to actually having a huge impact on making things just that little bit easier, a little bit better for people to feel more comfortable with.
And that was really interesting, because actually the survey, we asked these financial helpers, were they helping with other stuff, and they absolutely were. They were helping people with digital devices and just learning how to use them. They were helping people set up their broadband, helping people manage their utilities, and health appointments, all of these things. So actually it's quite often that there are other services where it'd be useful to have this sort of third party, trusted third party support as well. So I think that brings us full circle back to the Connection Project and why its aims are just so important, how we think in a cross-sector way about creating this digital society within which everyone can really thrive.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's why the research that you've done is really helpful, because to your point, knowing that there's all these brilliant, kind, fantastic people out there is wonderful. But yeah, how do we help them help others, and how do we help the helpers is one of the things that we're considering as part of working together to redesign how the UK can make the most of its digital future.
It's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, Jemma, for joining today and chatting
Not at
with me
all.
about this. It's been a
Not at
real
all.
pleasure to chat to you about it. And we will make sure that in the chats or the comments or wherever these things go, we'll put copies of the report. But just thanks ever so much to all of you for listening to us this far. And also thanks to our producer, Mike. We really appreciate you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.